Give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we thank Mr. Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Security Council Facilitator for the implementation of Resolution 2031, the Permanent Representative of Slovenia, Samuel Boger, and we also congratulate our Slovenian colleagues on the unanimous adoption of the 6-month report of the facilitator and count on their continued efforts to support the activities under the 2231 format until its scheduled conclusion in October 2025. We've listened to the head of delegation of the EU, Stavros Lambrinidis. Madam President, in the night of June 12th to 13th, member states of the parties to the NPT carried out unprovoked aggression, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear disaster. The Russian Federation strongly condemns the attacks on Iran, including its peaceful nuclear infrastructure, which is subject to IAEA safeguards. The actions of the U.S. and Israel directly violated the UN Charter, Security Council resolutions, including 487 and 2231, which we're discussing today, as well as the Charter of the IAEA and relevant resolutions of the IAEA General Conference. They constitute a direct and very dangerous challenge to the authority of the NPT, especially Iran's right guaranteed under Article 4 of the treaty to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, including uranium enrichment. And this was a major blow to the non-proliferation regime. And all of these actions were carried out by two states, one of which is a depositary of the NPT, while the other, for decades, has refused to accede to this crucial element of international security and has refused to subject its nuclear activities to IAEA safeguards. By the way, we are a bit surprised at Israel's request to take part in our meeting, which is taking place under the agenda item non-proliferation. We would like to believe that this decision hints at a potential accession of this country to the NPT, which the entire world would love to see. Colleagues, attacking Iranian infrastructure, including enterprises involved in the nuclear fuel cycle, creates a real threat of radiological consequences, which could affect not only Iranians but the entire Middle East. All of this, unfortunately, again, happened not just with the tacit consent, but with the approval of the UK, France, and Germany, which continue to consider themselves full-fledged parties to the JCPOA. Their assurances of their commitment to a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear program inspired little confidence before, but currently they are absolutely impossible to take seriously. Judge for yourselves that first these countries deliberately refuse to uphold their obligations under the nuclear deal by not providing the necessary conditions for ensuring economic benefits from the lifting of European sanctions against Iran, which were in effect till 2015. And then they followed in the footsteps of the U.S., which withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, and renewed their unilateral sanctions pressure on Tehran, thus precluding any prospect of a full restoration of the JCPOA, toward which our Iranian colleagues have repeatedly expressed their openness. At the same time, Berlin, London, and Paris attempted to portray Iran's legitimate retaliatory measures, which they themselves, Berlin, London, and Paris, provoked, as unleashing some imaginary Iranian nuclear threat. They repeatedly attempted to undermine the cooperation between Iran and the IAEA Secretariat, which included efforts to settle unresolved questions. And even in spite of that, Iran remained and remains the most rigorously verified state out of all the members of the IAEA. And the Director General of the IAEA's reports clearly indicate the lack of any proliferation risk. Here I emphasize that the IAEA's reports in nowhere mention the conversion of Iran's nuclear material for military purposes or for any undeclared purposes. So the IAEA has observed no signs that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon. Therefore, all of the assertions of our Western colleagues to the contrary are falsehoods calculated for an audience that has not read these reports or that do not understand this issue. The cynicism and hypocrisy of our Western colleagues reached a peak on June 12th. On that day, the IAEA Board of Governors adopted yet another puffed-up resolution on Iran, divorced from reality and inspired by Western countries. Immediately afterward, Israel carried out strikes against Iran's peaceful nuclear sites. A week later, the sovereign territory of Iran was attacked by the U.S., and this demonstrates that this 1-2 punch was agreed upon ahead of time. The UK and France, which claim to be champions of diplomacy, rushed to defend the aggression of West Jerusalem and Washington. As a result, last Sunday, we witnessed another attempt to legitimize the use of force in contravention of the UN Charter and strikes on peaceful nuclear facilities in violation of the IAEA Charter and all norms of nuclear safety and security. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz even made so bold as to cynically remark, as he already mentioned, that Israel is doing the Europeans' dirty work. And these are the actual words of a head of government of a state party to the JCPOA. We must not forget that West Jerusalem began its operation 2 days before a scheduled round of Iran-U.S. talks on the nuclear issue, mediated by Oman, with the clear intention of sabotaging this process. Against this backdrop, the Western trio even had the audacity to call not for Israel and the U.S., but for Tehran, the victim of aggression, to return to the negotiating table. If our British, French, and German colleagues continue to threaten launching this Resolution 2231, that is a mechanism of sanctions by the Security Council on Iran, I'd like to remind them that there's no political, legal, or procedural basis for this. Berlin, London, and Paris have chronically violated this resolution and the JCPOA, and therefore do not have the right to engage this mechanism. And the U.S. no longer has any basis to do so since it withdrew from the agreement. The Vienna mechanism for dispute settlement still has not been engaged. The U.S., the U.K., France, and Germany do not have the moral right to mention this. It is their actions that truly have betrayed diplomacy and have led to the current situation. Madam President, special responsibility in this regard lies with the IAEA and its Secretariat, given the infringement by Israel and the U.S. on the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, which forms the basis for the NPT. The Directorate General and his colleagues are obligated to uphold their mandate as well as resolutions of the General Conference 444 and 533. The IAEA leadership must not content itself with evasive language and fragmented information, but rather provide detailed reports on the attacks against Iranian nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguards. At the same time, it's extremely important to call things by their names and directly indicate who exactly carried out targeted attacks in violation of the charters of the UN and IAEA and resolutions of the Security Council and General Conference of the IAEA. Unfortunately, we've already seen that the Director General of the IAEA includes sometimes subjective judgments alongside facts and statistics in his reports, and these are then used by a certain number of countries to justify their unprovoked aggression. Madam President, the Iranian nuclear program can only be resolved through diplomacy, through negotiated solutions, which are based on international law and the principle of equal and indivisible security. The Russian Federation consistently has supported a peaceful solution to the concerns surrounding the Iranian nuclear program, which is acceptable to all parties as well as the international community as a whole. Here, the greatest responsibility lies on the UN Security Council, which is obligated to take the requisite measures. This is the goal of the draft resolution proposed by Russia together with our Chinese and Pakistani partners. Today, we are proposing to our Council colleagues an updated text that takes into account the latest developments and aims to bring about a lasting ceasefire as well as oversight of that ceasefire by the Security Council through Secretary General reporting. The JCPOA and Resolution 2231, adopted in 2015, demonstrated that the international community at that time rejected the military approach and clearly chose diplomacy instead. Today, we must make this same choice again without delay. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Under Secretary General Mr. Carlo, the head of the EU delegation, Mr. Lambrinidis, for the